cannot but begin where the beginning itself is always already rendered inoperable. For the locus of what might be termed a conceptual inception is, in the most advanced sense of pre-logical dispersion, annulled through its own hypertrophic dilation into that which, in negating its own sedimentation, suspends its possibility in a state of pure inversion. Thus, in approaching what must be seen as the unutterable torsion of the disjunctive severance that prefigures the conditions of the cognitive dislocation itself, one encounters neither mere absence nor plenitude, but the hypersegmented lattice of a peremptory cancellation whose logic is neither negation nor affirmation, but an oblique inversion of determination itself. This, we assert, is the necessary entry into the onto-epileptic substratum of the folded incision, where perception does not merely fragment under the duress of its own incapacity, but rather, in fracturing, reveals itself to have always been predicated on an anterior break, whose intelligibility was occluded precisely in its always already unfolded nature. Here we are forced to reject any recourse to epistemic immediacy, for what is at stake is not simply a disruption of comprehension, but rather the disclosure of an incommensurability so severe that even the notion of comprehensibility is rendered suspect. We must therefore outline the conditions of this severance, which in its own function is neither temporal nor atemporal, neither spatial nor non-spatial, but instead dwells within the infraperceptual collapse of that which, in rendering itself available to thought, simultaneously forecloses the very gesture of its apprehension. The severance, which we will term precognitive torsion, is thus to be distinguished from mere aporia. For whereas the latter signals the limit of a given epistemic structuration, the former denotes the implosion of the epistemic horizon itself. 2. Grasp this torsion. However futilely, one must engage in an operation of negative extrusion, a process by which the conditions of its own impossibility are made manifest only in their moment of complete annulment. It is here that the fundamental paradox of severance emerges. The moment one apprehends the fracturing of the precognitive substratum, one is necessarily reinscribed within its distortion, thereby becoming complicit in the very obliteration one seeks to articulate. This is not a mere performative contradiction, but a catastrophic inversion of the relation between cognition and its precognitive foundation, wherein the latter, in its very being, is exposed as non-being. The condition of the subject within this framework is, of course, untenable, for what is revealed in the face of the severance is the inoperability of the subject position itself. The eye that seeks to grasp the fracturing finds itself not as a coherent entity, but as a residual flux whose structure is determined not by an autonomous agency, but by the involution of the perceptual field itself. This means that the subject does not experience disjunction. Rather, the subject is itself the byproduct of disjunction's recursive unfurling, a derivative effect of a fundamental fissuring that cannot be contained within any known categorial schema. If we were to venture towards a formalized articulation of this phenomenon, we might describe it as the involuted contortion of an a priori non-sight, wherein the very topology of perceptual grounding ceases to adhere to the logic of spatial coherence instead, existing as a parasitic excrescence on the limit of intelligibility. The topology, if it can even be termed as such, is not merely discontinuous, but uncontiguously superimposed, such that what appears as a sequence of relational disparities is, in fact, a recursive implosion of phenomenological density into an irreducible non-localized immanence. What then is to be done with this insight? Can one think the fracture without succumbing to its vertigo? The answer, though necessarily suspended, suggests that one cannot but already be within it, that to speak at all is to articulate from within a logic of dissolution that cannot be transcended. And yet, if there is an imperative here, it is not towards synthesis, but towards a radical acceptance of the uninhabitability of cognition itself, a recognition that the act of knowing is, in its deepest structure, indistinguishable from the convulsions of a pre-subjective disarticulation. Thus, the path forward is not one of conceptual mastery, nor even of dialectical resolution, but of a willingness to endure the catastrophic extrusion of thought into its own unthought, an endurance that, in forsaking the hope of resolution, finds, in itself, the only possibility of approaching that which refuses to be thought.